Today we answer your mailbag questions, including something the Islanders are doing a little bit better, but need to do a lot better in order to really make this team and organization hum. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. We've got a lot to discuss on today's show. But first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, we can always do mailbag questions. So send us an email to lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever it is that's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X @LockedOnIsles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYRBSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long during the offseason. That's hirings, firings, trade rumors, free agency, the draft. If it's happening to the New York Islanders, we're going to discuss it here on the Locked On Islanders podcast. And we're going to start off, as we mentioned, everydayers may remember, we've mentioned last week we were going to do a mailbag show, and I pushed it up a couple of days, basically just to, A, get a couple of more questions, and B, because of the unfortunate passing of Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Gaudreau, and really kind of needed to address that in our Monday show. But first question is from friend of the show, James. Hey, Gil, it's James. So with all the talk about prospects this offseason, I got to thinking about some things, and I can't help but feel sorry for anyone who gets signed with the Islanders. You've said in the past the Islanders don't have a great track record at developing players. On top of that, they never seem to call up players from Bridgeport when there's an injury. Instead, they go out and sign somebody else. For example, when Mayfield got hurt, they went out and traded for Robert Bortuzzo. And if they do call someone up, they don't even give them a fair shot before they're done with them. For example, Arno Durando was a fan favorite in Bridgeport and a good player. Came up for a few games, played well, I thought, but was sent back and eventually traded. Ruslan Ishkakov, the star player on Bridgeport last couple of years, brought up but never even given a chance to play. Then he goes back to Russia. I don't know, but with bad development and the lack of interest we show in giving the kids a fair shot, how can anyone be excited to get drafted by the Islanders? What are your thoughts on this, and what is it going to take to change this? First off, James, thank you for the question. I think it's a darn good one. And look, I think, unfortunately, the Islanders' track record at the draft kind of speaks for itself in recent years. Let's do, 2018 through 2020, because players drafted after that, well, maybe we can go to 2021. Out of the 2018 draft, Noah Dobson is one of only 3 players in that draft who played even one game in the NHL. And Dobson is by far the best player that the Islanders have developed, in the last, let's say in the Lou Lamoriello era. Oliver Wahlstrom played 193 NHL games. He was also a first-round pick. by the Islanders that year, but we know Wally never really developed into a full-time NHLer. And then you have Ruslan Ishkakov in the second round, who played one NHL game, and as you mentioned, James, is now back in Russia. 2020, the Islanders did not have a first or second round pick as of right now. The only player who the Islanders drafted that year who has even appeared in an NHL game is William Dufour. He played in one game. I believe it was for about 5 or 6 minutes. Now, Dufour may still eventually make the NHL. Alex Jeffries was a part of that draft class. He still could have a future, but overall, not looking like there's a lot of NHL players coming out of that draft. 2021, no first round pick again. Lou Lamoriello, of course, likes to trade those picks away. But again, Aatu Räty, second round pick, traded to get Bo Horvat. He still only played 15 NHL games, spent most of last season in the AHL, and he is the only player from the Islanders 2021 class to reach the NHL. Out of the 2019 class, again, the Islanders drafted 5 players. Samuel Bolduc played 51 games so far, has yet to establish himself as a full-time NHLer. Simon Holmstrom has played 125 games, 21 goals, 34 points. He is sort of, on the borderline of making himself an everyday NHLer. This season, I think, will be critical in that process for him. But realistically, Simon Holmstrom is a third or fourth line player. Look, could he still develop more offense at some point in his career this year, next year? Yeah, it's possible. But, does he look like an elite, pick, a first round pick who's going to become a major contributor to the top 6? No. Does he look like a great goal scorer? No. He looks like his potential is role player, penalty killer, fast checking forward with the odd shorthanded goal mixed in. Again, I'm not trying to put down Simon Holmstrom or Samuel Bolduc or Oliver Wahlstrom. I'm just saying that if you follow the pattern here with the New York Islanders, that they do not do a great job or have not done a great job in recent years of drafting and developing players who are going to become, stars in the National Hockey League. And let's even take a step back and look at the big picture. For the New York Islanders, draft and develop is critical because for whatever reason there is, the New York Islanders have never in their history signed an elite free agent in his prime. It just has not happened. And so as a result of that, drafting and developing players becomes more critical. And I think Lou Lamoriello and certainly Barry Trotz back in the day, I think Lane Lambert and Patrick Roy are a little less strict about it than Trotz was, but I think this is a Lou Lamoriello kind of a thing. They trust veterans more than young players. And there have been a lot of issues over the years as far as why the Islanders have not been able to draft and develop players. But when you can't sign elite free agents and you're not drafting and developing players, how do you get these big ticket players to your team? You have to end up with a trade and sign, which is what Lou Lamoriello has done really to help improve this team since he got here. He's traded away first-round picks, traded away young players like Aatu Räty, and then signed the players that he traded for to long extensions with no trade clauses and high salaries. So that's how you get a Kyle Palmieri and a Bo Horvat, just to name a couple of guys who the Islanders traded for and kept. And it's good to do that, but it doesn't work as a long-term strategy, especially when your roster is older like the Islanders are. Now, as of right now, we know there's no Matt Martin, there's no Cal Clutterbuck on this roster, but are they, while they still may come back, there are no young players coming up through the organization, and those are two fourth-line guys. But there are no young players coming up who are going to step in and take over those roles. I mean, okay, you want to say Kyle McLean? He's 25. It's not that Kyle McLean is really young at this point. But, you have Kyle McLean, and that's it. And you need to be able to develop players to step in and become, the next generation of guys who are going to take over your team. And in the salary cap era, draft and develop is even more important. Why? Because an entry-level contract gets you time with a player where you're not paying top dollar. So those initial 3-year contracts, and then to a lesser extent, when they're restricted free agents without arbitration rights, then restricted free agents with arbitration rights, the salaries go up a little bit, but it's still manageable. And then only after they've been in the NHL for a few years do you then have the arbitration rights and then the unrestricted free agency where the salary really goes up. So a big part of the reason that the Islanders are in such a cap crunch is because that Lou Lamoriello made these, trade and sign moves and gave out, some questionable contracts to bottom six forwards and bottom pair defensemen, and he's traded away so many first round picks. It is a reason that the Islanders are stuck in the muddy middle, and it's something this team has to resolve. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about the prospects because The Athletic just came out with a new list of the top prospects under 23. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We have some more mailbag questions as well. For our Islanders' birthday of the day, probably the most popular player on the Islanders, their first year in the NHL, who unfortunately met with a very tragic and premature end. Let's see if you can guess who that is. We've got all that and more next on the Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't need to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And look, with Game Time, they still have the panoramic view from your seat, which is my favorite feature on Game Time. You go on the app, you could see a panoramic view from your seat before you purchase the tickets. That way you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. That's LOCKEDONNHL. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Another part of the problem with the prospects and the development, and we talked a little bit about the reluctance of the Islanders to let younger players make mistakes. And it becomes a vicious cycle. It's almost like this team, this franchise, is running on a treadmill. What do I mean by that? The Islanders are in the muddy middle. They either barely make or barely miss the playoffs. That's kind of how it's been since Lou Lamoriello, took over as GM. Because of that, and because Lou and the coaches tend to not trust young players, if they do call up a young player, it's usually for one of those situations where, so-and-so is going to miss 2 or 3 games. So you call up an Arno Durando, or you call up, Grant Hutton, and you have them play those 2 or 3 games, and then you send them back to Bridgeport. Or, they called up William Dufour and let him play, 5-6 minutes in a game. If a young player makes a mistake on the ice, turns the puck over, how many times did we see this with Oliver Wahlstrom? They're benched. They don't play. They'll sit out a game or 2 afterwards. They aren't allowed to make mistakes. And yet, that's how you grow. That's how you learn. That's how you develop as a player. And then eventually the mistakes hopefully get reduced and you gain confidence. But because the Islanders have so little room for error being in the muddy middle, the result is that they're reluctant to bring up players who are young and inexperienced and let them learn. And, you then get a situation where their development is curtailed. You now have traded away, they traded away a first-round pick 4 years in a row. So you're not selecting players at the top of the draft as often. You're not giving them a chance when you do get young players to integrate themselves into the lineup, and it just kind of stunts their growth. And, how many times have we seen a veteran player on the Islanders make the same mistake over and over and over again, whether it's not hustling back on defense or turning the puck over in your own zone that leads to a goal, or taking a dumb penalty. We've seen that from this team far too often, and yet the veterans keep being put out there, and the young players who will make similar mistakes, they sit right away. So, these are all reasons. Now, you asked, James, how do you change this? How do you change this? And I don't think it's that complicated to change it. I really don't. If you bring up 1 or 2 really good players in your system, you have Noah Dobson right now. That's sort of the poster boy for, developing a player the right way. And the Islanders did make a move to get Dobson. He was kind of brought along slowly his first year in the NHL. And then the next year he played more. And then obviously he started playing well enough to get more minutes. They handled Dobson better in his development than most of the other players. And I think part of it is because they had higher hopes for Dobber, and Dobber showed more skill more quickly. But you got to develop some guys. Now, The Athletic just came out with ranking the best players and prospects in the NHL under the age of 23. Now, keep in mind, this list went 155 players, which means that each NHL team, if all things are equal, and they never are, should have 4 or 5 players on this list. Well, the Islanders have 2 players on this list. 75 Cole Iserman. That's the highest player on this list with the Islanders. You can go back and hear our analysis of Cole Iserman and what he's meant to this organization. You got that. And then right near the end, in fact, at 155, the last spot on this list, the Athletic put Marcus Gidloff, the Islanders draft pick from this year, as number 155. Now, again, what do both of these players have in common? They're pretty far away from being NHL ready, but you have at least, guys who have potential. And, oh, yeah, by the way, the only other Islander-related player on this list, a guy who was drafted by the Islanders and is on this list, is Aatu Räty, who the Islanders, again, traded away as part of the Bo Horvat deal. And Aatu Räty, 133rd on the list. So part of it is lack of picks. Part of it is lack of development. Part of it is the bad contracts and lack of cap space and the lack of trust in young players. It becomes a vicious cycle. And the result is the Islanders end up stuck in the muddy middle. So to change that, James, you got to get a couple of young players who you drafted and develop them properly. And just, if Cole Iserman, for example, becomes a star in this league, the stigma attached to the Islanders goes away. And, you got to start drafting and developing players. The only way to do it is to do it. And the Islanders are going to have to change the reality, the facts on the ground, as they say, in order to change the perception. So let's see if they can do it. We've got another question from the mailbag to answer. So we'll talk a little bit about that, plus our Islanders birthday of the day, all that and more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Want to thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On NHL podcast. Where the season never ends, they provide national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NHL in the description of this show, so you don't need to search. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we have another question, and I want to thank James for his question. And our other question is from Mike in Vermont. Hey, Gil, any word from Josh Bailey? His PTO with Ottawa seemed to go pretty well last year. Is he looking to sign on somewhere or seeming to accept retirement? Mike in Vermont. Mike, I think at this point, Josh Bailey has accepted retirement. I don't know that he's made that official. But I think if he really wanted to be playing again and had a realistic chance to play again, we would be talking about him signing either a contract or more likely a PTO, which is a tryout, professional tryout. He had the PTO last year with Ottawa. They did not sign him. No team has issued a PTO with him this year. I do not believe that he will play, but it wouldn't completely shock me if he gave it one more go. It's not going to be with the Islanders. I would love to see Bailey be able to go out and finish his career on a high note, but I think Bailey is probably done at this point as an NHL player. What I would still like to see, however, from Josh Bailey and from the New York Islanders is I'd like to see a Josh Bailey night. Whether or not they retire his number, I can't say. But I would like to see him honored, recognized for what he did for the organization, for the community, for the team over the years. some of his better clutch performances. Those are things that I would like to see. And Josh Bailey, the beautiful thing about him, he joined the Islanders as an 18, 19-year-old kid, played till he was 33. So that was 14 years in an Islanders jersey. And I just think he was a great Islander, the way the fans embraced him and at times kind of struggled with him when he started to slow down. But Bales, to me, just a really good player for the Islanders over the course of his career. But I do think he is more or less done in the NHL. I'd love for him to prove me and a lot of other people wrong, but that's the feeling I get. And again, Mike, thank you so much for the question. And, I've always been a Josh Bailey fan, both as a person and as a hockey player. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And this is kind of a sad one, but Tuesday would have been the 75th birthday of former Islanders winger Brian Spinner Spencer. Spencer, a native of Fort St. James, British Columbia, 5'11", 185 pounds, drafted by the Maple Leafs in the 5th round back in 1969, made his NHL debut with Toronto in 69-70. Islanders got him in the expansion draft, and he was a fan favorite for the Islanders in their first season. Had 14 goals, 38 points, and 90 penalty minutes while playing in all 78 games for the Islanders that first year. Came back the second year, 5 goals, 21 points in 54 games before the Islanders traded him to Buffalo. He played for Buffalo and Pittsburgh before finishing his career in the AHL. The thing about Brian Spencer, and you got to remember how bad the Islanders were that first season. 12 wins in 78 games. What at that point in NHL history, that was the worst ever season by an expansion team or any team. Won, least amount of points. And it was sad. It was difficult to watch. But Brian Spencer, Spinner Spencer never stopped hustling. And he hit everything that moves, and he just played the kind of hockey that you love to see, especially on a team where, the team is struggling. Brian Spencer was out there hitting everything that moves. He played with passion when it was easy to give up. Unfortunately, after hockey, he got involved with alcohol, allegedly with drugs, was charged with kidnapping and murder at one point, and ended up being acquitted of that, but moved to Florida and was fatally shot in a robbery following a purchase of crack cocaine. He died just at such a young age, just at the age of 38 in 1988, and it was a sad ending to a difficult life. But a guy who, if you watched the Islanders in their first season, Brian Spencer was a big part of it. One of his best games as an Islander, February 24th, 1973, Islanders hosting the Red Wings at the Nassau Coliseum. The goalies, Dennis DeJordy for Detroit, Jerry Desjardins for the Islanders. With the Islanders up 1-0 in the second period, Brian Spinner Spencer, our Islanders' birthday of the day, scores his 11th goal of the year. Lauren Henning and Ed Westfall with the assist. And in the third period, when Marcel Dion scored for Detroit and made it 3-2, Brian Spencer clinches the win with an empty net goal. Craig Cameron and Ed Westfall get the assist. Islanders win their 8th game in franchise history, beating the Red Wings 4-2. For Brian Spencer, 2 goals. He was a +1, and he had 4 shots on goal, which placed him second on the Islanders behind Billy Harris. Actually, Billy Smith came in and finished this game He had 20 saves to earn the win. Jerry Desjardins basically made 3 saves in this game, but a rare win for the first-year Islanders behind a 2-goal performance by Brian Spinner Spencer. He is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. We will be back on Friday. Training camp really, really close. We may have some news on PTOs. Possible the Islanders could try to sign one, although, again, unless they free up cap space, I don't see any room for any of these guys to be fit on the roster. I still think there will be one move before the season starts. We're going to talk about all of that and more on Friday's show. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And, of course, let's go Islanders.